Si hay alguna pregunta en este momento que ustedes quieran hacerle, sería conveniente. Y para nosotros facilitar la discusión, vamos a eliminar algunas de las mesas, vamos a pedir a los colegas que están sentados en esta área que se muevan entonces en esta otra dirección para hacer un grupo más pequeño de discusión. Pero si en este momento tienen alguna pregunta que le quieran hacer respecto a su experiencia, pues bienvenida es ahora, en lo que los compañeros se mueven entonces en esta otra parte. En términos de... perdón.
Enfocados a la experiencia que él ha tenido con esta iniciativa en Canadá, o si preguntas que tenemos curiosidad e interés en traer a la mesa para la discusión ahora y que él desde ahora nos dé un poco de insumo.
En relación con
el tema de e-learning y de establecer una agenda de investigación.
Ok, perfecto, sí.
¿Puede ser ese tipo de preguntas?
No, ustedes, esto es
¿Sí?
libre, siéntanse en la libertad. Sí, entiendo yo de poder, lo importante es que podamos sacar, ¿verdad? Provecho de su presencia aquí, la experiencia que él tiene, que han tenido, sí.
Pues
obviamente.
Entonces me lanzo a hacer la primera pregunta.
Sí, adelante. Y los compañeros se van entonces colocando también aquí, por favor. Dr. Siemens, I think there is a question here. Do you have your phone on? Okay.
Dr. Sorry, Siemens, question? Yes.
Probably to have your framework before we start to talk about the possible issue that we would like to address. I am from the University of Puerto Rico, and currently I am a director of a e-learning project at the university in the Rio Piedras campus, and practically the other people who are here are could be from private universities, know that the UPR is very backwards with e-learning initiatives. Somehow, probably, I don't know, I will be judgmental if I would bring, the reasons. So I prefer to pass that and let you know that we are gradually moving towards bringing courses to the virtual modality and actually trying to discern if it would be much better a hybrid model or a totally online model. But what I would like to address and maybe have your view is that we want to go beyond the traditional e-learning model because obviously the Web 2.0 paradigm and tools are there for expanding all the networking and precisely all the things and issues about connectedness, right? Instead of doing this in a virtual closed environment of a course management system. So I would like you to comment if the e-learning agenda, research agenda that you have been addressing, or actually what is the trend towards doing an e-learning 2.0 kind of paradigm, and how do you, provide experience or practical best practices in that direction, particularly when we're talking about personal learning environments and those new platforms that are coming up.
Well, that question sounds like it would be the great start of a research project. But no, I think in 2005, all the hype was Web 2.0, 2006, 2007. That was the big focus, and that's what everybody said. And we heard people coming out and saying things like digital immigrants and digital natives. And suddenly we were being told that we had to use technology because all our students were using technologies. And we were told, well, technology changes the human brain, so students demand technology in the classroom now. And a whole lot of things like this that really didn't have a research basis. But this is what we were told. And a lot of educators and probably administrators made decisions somewhat in line with that. But if you look at some of the research that's come out over the last probably 3 or 4 years, just pick on one topic, this notion of digital immigrants and digital natives, which was really accepted as truth by a lot of educators. And now if you see the actual reports that come out of it, there's a view that no, it's not that black and white. Students aren't that clear-cut. And so we're starting to see better answers than simply functioning on assumptions. So I think the first point to what you're asking is we need to make sure that we're not functioning on assumptions, that we're actually functioning on, is this what our students want? Is this, because it's been overhyped. In some level, technology has been overhyped. Even the EDUCAUSE annual report on the use of IT in undergraduate programs indicates that students are actually quite conservative in their desire to have technology used in classrooms. They're quite aggressive in their desire for technology in their personal lives, but when they use it for academic purposes, it's a little bit different. Now, we don't know why, right? Maybe it's because they haven't had enough experience with it, and that's why that's the case. Maybe it's because they haven't experienced a well-planned technology rollout. But for now, at least, I guess what the element to consider is what's the basis for the assumptions that we're making about why we ought to teach with technology? And if you answer that question in terms of getting to your question about framework, the framework, I think, needs to be done at a structural level, which means you can start by saying, you know, here's our instructional design team or our learning design team. You want to make sure it's multidisciplinary so that your learning design team includes not just the designer and the subject matter expert, but you need to bring in people who have perhaps expertise in games, expertise in emerging technologies. You might want to have graphic designers present. So you have really a team-based model for rolling out your systemic e-learning design approach. But throughout it all, you want to build in points of capture, whether you call it research in a formal sense, with intentions to publish, or whether it's less formal research that you're just using to inform your next iteration of the program or the next course that you're designing. There are a ton of frameworks available. Again, I mentioned Grania Knoll earlier. She's done quite a bit of work on mapping e-learning practices to pedagogy, or mapping the design model to the pedagogical model and how that would work. There'd probably be a good person to look at some of her papers because she's looked at that quite extensively. But even then, you can look at a variety of different models. It's not really the framework that you're using that's so important in my eyes as the fact that you have a high feedback model that allows you to iterate quickly and improve on the quality of a product as you get feedback, because your students are going to be different in profile than the students, let's say, of this university. So what works here might not work there. That's why I think each institute needs to consider how it's going to incorporate the feedback that the students and the system and the faculty members provide. But that's from a design perspective, a framework end. Key point where your initiative will fail or succeed is going to be based on faculty. Right, because they're the ones that are going to teach this. So it's a matter of developing faculty support system as well. Who can they talk to? And this is an argument I made at University of Manitoba. Libraries. You know, we have different faculties at the University of Manitoba have their own librarians. What a great opportunity to have your librarians be your faculty support people, because they already know the faculty well and they know a lot of the faculty members because they're doing information work with them. So you want to support your faculty, you want to make sure your students have a place to email. And not just email, they should be able to call, or they should be able to do a live chat on this stuff as well. It's not, when you roll out e-learning, you have to roll out a whole sequence of support structures that make sure it's going to be successful. If not, you roll out e-learning, it bombs, your students say it's horrible, they're never going to take another course again, the university concludes e-learning doesn't work, which isn't the right answer. The right answer is poor planning doesn't work. But nonetheless, so I'm throwing out a few random thoughts to get out to this question of a framework. I would be more encouraging to you at least to say, plan a rich feedback system and worry less so about a structured framework in advance, and evolve your framework with the feedback you get from your participants.
So if the Canadian experience is, or Canadian government is divided into provinces, and they get a little bit sticky when you talk about learning.
Yes.
What would be a benchmarking, a study used, or an e-learning benchmarking project that you've done that can be, that you can share with all of us?
Okay. Well, benchmarking, I guess, is something that a lot of administrators want in a university system. The work I've done hasn't been focused on trying to benchmark. Partly because the difficulty with it, because if you create a benchmarking structure, let's say around e-learning in dentistry, that might not be good e-learning in nursing, and nursing might not be good e-learning initiative in, let's say, psychology. I look instead at what would you consider, and each university or department needs to define it for themselves, but what are important elements for you around the learning experience? If you look at something like Chickering and Gamson's notion of, 7 practices, effective practices for undergraduate education, tasks such as time on task or high faculty contact. I mean, if you look at some of those principles, and in my eyes, a good learning principle is a good learning technology principle. So if it's important that students have time to think, to reflect, to interact with each other, rich dialogue with faculty members in a classroom, then it's also going to be important when you start to roll it out online. Now, benchmarking starts to look at, because there's such an array, you're looking at technical standards. What kind of tools are you going to use? Are you going to use Flash? Are you going to use HTML5, which is supposed to be the up-and-coming big thing? Are you going to design your content within an LMS, like Moodle or Blackboard, for example? Or are you going to, what we're doing at Athabasca right now, we have several large grants. One, I think it was around the, I'm getting the numbers wrong, I'm sure, but one was around $5 or $6 million, which was for digitizing all of our course content, and we have a lot. And second one was a knowledge infrastructure grant, which was closer to $7 million, where we were trying to improve the overall role of technology within the institution. So what we're currently planning to do is to have all of our content sit in an open source system called Alfresco. All of our learning content will be in this system, and we will link to it from within Moodle. Now, we're also working with a developer right now so that, because if you're familiar with Moodle, what happens is you can go in, edit a page, and then save it. But the problem is now you're authoring multiple copies of the same web page, which is a big issue. So we're working so that when you edit something in Moodle, it automatically, the changes get passed through for updating within Alfresco. So you sort of have one area for your content, which then starts to become valuable for you to use it for multimedia devices as well, or for mobile tools. So those are some of the things that relate to technical standards. Then there's pedagogical standards, which university also needs to define. How much interaction is needed, students with each other, students with faculty. Do you want live sessions, or do you only want sessions done exclusively asynchronously whenever students have time? That also starts to play a role. The same thing holds true for assessment. What's effective assessment by the standards of your department or your university? So I know benchmarking are important ways to go, but regrettably, I just don't think in terms of benchmarking. It's more so in terms of effective practice that I would look at and try and define, from a future-focused perspective, what a good course looks like for your program. Does that even get close to answering your question? Oh, that was totally accidental. No, I'm just kidding.